All right, so at it again, the Initiated Man podcast. Bro, thanks for joining me here with Jake Putan. And where I'd love to start, bro, is I know that you've had a fascinating journey through your work with barbering, how you found yourself following the model that was laid out for barbers, I guess, and then reinventing yourself and from what I'm understanding, the barbering world as well, as a result of some transformation, some initiations that you've been through. Can you share a little bit of that backstory?
Yeah, great segue. So I think probably close to 10 years into barbering, and I followed the ladder of what was presented, and at the peak of that ladder I realized this is the thing that has been presented as the greatest opportunity for me to experience in my career, and I'm doing it, and it felt like a shell, and it was empty. And at the same time, I was invited to a retreat, and was able to experience a level of depth that allowed me to have the understanding that there was more than just that shell, and that there gets to be an opportunity to experience fulfillment through that that potentially superficial work, but adding the layers of the depth to actually realize what I needed. And over a series of the next 5 years of continual exploration and listening, there was a realization of where barbering had actually come from and the role that barbers held uh, back to the lineage of ancient Egypt, and the barber's role within community, and being even a player of initiations for priests and other men within the community. Realizing that and then bringing that back and integrating it into that shell world has been a summary of that time.
You mentioned like following the sequence of listening. For people who are perhaps unfamiliar with what that even means, like let's map it out a little bit. I'd love to hear it through your personal story or steps of the story. If there's one moment or moments that you can recount where the listening showed you a pathway.
Okay. This was probably a more recent one, but there was a point where even there's been multiple points through that 5 year journey of constant realization that there is even more depth to be able to experience and integrate. And so, one moment in March last year, actually, where I was creating my own little studio with my own clients coming to my own house and different things, and was fulfilling the opportunity that I realized was available there. And I'd gone away and I was in Mullumbimby and working with this mentor of mine whose lineage actually comes from Egypt. And simultaneously, I was about to go to Egypt 3 weeks later, and was sitting in meditation with her. And I had complete plans to stay in the studio where I was. And during the
Mhm.
meditation, there's this really loud pull to go like, actually, you need to close all of this, and Egypt's going to be so big that you can't come back to the same life.
Mm.
And that that message was so loud that it was like, okay, I can't deny this, because I spent the majority of the first half of my life ignoring those messages and not listening and not trusting and
Mm.
trying to hold on to that ladder that I realized didn't lead anywhere.
And it's fascinating. The more I speak to, I think this is the seventh or eighth conversation that I'm having for this series on the podcast. The more that I speak to brothers, to men about this theme of initiation, the more that it's pulling us into greater sensibility with our internal compass. And like one of the key pillars of being an initiated man is essentially that being resourceful enough in our internal landscape to orient ourselves in life. from that deep state of listening and understanding like the breadcrumbs that are left, or the signposts that are left along the pathway for us.
The experience of that for me in that journey was going to Egypt and seeing what was on the other side of that pull, that message, that listening to go. There was another message to go traveling, and at the time I had $1,000 in my bank account, and I laughed, and I'm like, okay, how's this gonna happen? And it's interesting you talk about the sensibility to use the resources, and previously in my life it would be relying on quite material resources to answer my questions.
Mhm.
And this time I didn't have that, and it was like these all my material resources were being removed. And so the initiation, the question for me was, can you trust without holding on to those pillars of safety?
From answering that question of could you trust, how did things work out? How did it go?
Yeah, cool. So came back from Egypt. The partner that I was with at the time was still in Australia, and I said to her, "It's like, look, we're going to go overseas. I don't know how it's going to happen, and uh, we're going to move indefinitely." And I believe within a month, one of my clients from Sydney was about to go to Europe for 4 weeks, and he asked me to come with him to cut his hair. And I said, look, this is a situation. We need our flights and transits covered. We'll cover the accommodation. And so he covered Sydney to Athens to Mykonos to Naples to Amsterdam. And he went back to Australia, and we kept going, and spent
Incredible.
2 months after that in Spain. So yeah.
When you look back at it, when you found yourself in that stage of like the emptiness and feeling like you were in a shell, and you had the impulse to listen to take that trip to Egypt, could you have foreseen what life was going to be like on the other side?
No way. There was absolutely no, there was not even a texture that I could feel of what it could have been. It was just like you're going to discover new ways of living, and maybe new processes that the universe follows this frequency of miracles that you can't discover if you're trying to hold on to the old ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. I find for myself as well that the greatest initiations were the ones where I felt like I was swallowed whole by the darkness, and I couldn't even conceptualize what the other side of Marco looked like once he was through the gauntlet. And they've typically been the most challenging, but also the most rewarding.
Mm. Do you, I'm curious for you as well. Do you feel like that was there any kind of flavor of that new version of Marco?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say the biggest one for me was when I started uh, sun dancing, and it was like every initiation I'd been through up until that point, I kind of had a sense of what the other side looked like. There was some degree of clarity there for me. Whereas this one, I really looked at it and I had no idea. I was like, it was coming to terms with like I didn't think that I was going to die, but it was a big death, a death and a
Mm.
rebirth. I didn't know what the other side looked like, or like what that marker was. I couldn't even picture him, imagine him, or anything like that. I'm a big fan of who he's becoming, and who he is. Yeah, it's beautiful, man. I'm curious. You mentioned barbering and its roles in
Mm.
ancient Egypt and all this. Take us on that journey. What was that like for you?
There's a few parts. There was from a really intro level, the lady that I was working with in Malumbibi, she was prompting me to explore the roots and the lineage of barbering, and even my own journey, my own path.
Right.
Um, different routes of rites of passage and different things there. And Egypt was quite interesting because where when it had actually come into my world, it was at a moment where after spending my whole life following the models of safety and climbing this ladder, and I'd spent most of my time just saving money, and that was all I did. And for the last 5 years, there's been a process of actually spending all of that money, and the last the last expenditure of what was there actually went towards a men's pilgrimage in Bali, and Bali got cancelled, and they let me know that it was going to be moved, but just to stay tuned. It was okay. And at the time, because I'd spent all my money, and I said to myself, like, I need to find a way to generate significant income to at least get myself out of this hole. And
Mhm.
what came to me was to actually run a 12-month workshop, teaching other barbers how to do education. And the name that came to that was Legacy. And as I started working with the branding and different things, that the wallpaper, the background that I used was actually of these pillars in this Egyptian temple. And meanwhile, I have got no connection, apparently, to Egypt. And maybe a few months after that, the guys that were running the trip in Bali let me know that they're going to move the trip to Egypt. Significantly, it was about a few weeks after my 30th birthday that the trip happened. We get to the temple in Egypt where those pillars, also in the photo, and one of the guys on the trip said to our guide, he goes, "Oh, this is the Legacy Temple," and so it became humorous. And while I was in Egypt, I suppose there was a lot of almost expectation for something miraculous to happen, and there was nothing necessarily obvious, or out of context until we got to later on in the trip, and we actually went to this barber shop who was friends with the guide, and I offered to cut hair in there for the guys that were with us, and they would actually pay the barber shop instead of me. And during that process, there was quite a powerful experience of space holding and almost initiation through the haircuts with the guys as they're removing dead ends from their crown, and
Mm.
moving through their own processes, and realizing the land that I'm on holds the ancient lineage of barbering where this was practiced
Right.
consciously, and then that as a piece to connect that part of legacy and go, oh, okay, there's a message here that I get to share with other barbers and speak to the responsibility that we have with men in community in particular.
That's fascinating, man. And for me, like what I take from it is it's so curious how your path of like barbering, which might on one level seem just like, a career path that you've chosen, but it actually is very deeply aligned to your spiritual path as well, and how the universe delivered that information to you just the right time, which like gives voice to, I guess anyone that's listening to this to recognize that there's no path more sacred than the one that we've already walked, and that all paths do lead to home. So like the information will find us, the wisdom will find us, the insights will find us, provided we show up for the initiations, provided we take up the call to adventure when it's there. Just the way that you did, it was like, cool, Bali's not happening. We're going to Egypt. I can imagine that would be very destabilizing for people. And in that destabilization, some people might just be like, you know what, refund me or whatever. But like you felt the deeper calling of, there's actually something here for me. And so despite the turbulence, you still went for it, which is a beautiful thing because for me, and it's like the teachings of the Sphinx, right? Like since we're already on the topic of Egypt, like the Sphinx stands as the guard, before the temples, before we are graced by the wisdom and the lineage and all this stuff. And the Sphinx cast like these labyrinths I've heard it beautifully expressed for the maze for us to get to know our hearts, what they really are. Getting there as much as as an initiation as the process itself, as is what follows afterwards. And it's like that lit labyrinth that gets cast by the Sphinx is the initial testing to see, well, are you even worthy of standing to receive wisdom, insight, revelation, or are you just going to say it's complicated and I'm stressed out and have a tantrum, right?
Yeah, I feel that it's the process leading up to the decision as well, and
Yeah.
like that's it's almost the initiation is the pre-journey. The event is the opportunity to test if we're ready.
Post Egypt travels, how did life respond? What opened up for you?
I'd say this is a really challenging part of it. Is was the integrating back into almost bridging those worlds together. Uh, the moments of discovering absolute miracle where money was showing up completely unexpectedly in the most almost dire moments of going like it's now or never. Especially while I was in Spain, and I'm kind of scoping out spots in the park to go. Yeah, that could be a good spot to go and camp. Like
Mhm.
with my luggage. If it needs to happen, and it's like I've fasted before. It's really like you're just outside, sleeping, camping. I've done that before. It's really not that bad. Just attached to this idea of safety. Anyway, and in those moments, for example, one of them where I had both my accounts were minus $200, and my partner at the time I had 44 cents in her account, and we had 2 nights left accommodation,
Mhm.
and absolutely everything was done. Everything that I'd tried to do to get money was complete. And I was like, all right, I'm listening, and I feel the call to actually just surrender to what is here and stop trying to save myself. And where I actually went was a temple in Spain, and just sat in there and meditated. Um, Came home, went to sleep, woke up the next morning about 4:30 in the morning. My car had sold in Australia, and it's laughable. There was multiple iterations of this, and on the final leg of the journey, we'd landed in Hawaii with, I believe, $12, and I knew that just even a taxi to a hotel was going to be at least 80. And I laughed, and it became so entertaining to go like, all right, I've exhausted all my assets. I'm curious as to where it's going to come from this time. And I almost felt safer in those moments because I'd been provided so much evidence than moments of actually having money and having to spend it.
Mhm.
So we land, and I turn my notifications on, and there's a guy who I'd done breathwork with before, that I never charged, and he messaged me and goes, "Hey, bro, just wanted to share an appreciation for the experiences that we've shared, and the journey that I've been able to go on after the breathwork with you. If you ever need any help with money, just let me know." And I was like, "Look, here's the circumstance right now. That would be really appreciated." And yeah, that got us home. So
I relate to a lot as well. Like I wrote about it in my book Soul Path, and like I lived it for quite a while. So it resonates deeply for me as well. That deep trust of leaning in, not knowing what tomorrow holds, literally, and having faith in the universe to provide and to meet our intentionality and our decidedness. So there's something beautiful about that aspect of saying if that's what it takes, right? Like you're there with the luggage, you're scoping out parks, and if that's what it takes for me to listen and to live this dream, then like let's have at it, right? And oftentimes we're beautifully surprised, But in facing that seemingly tragic situation, for me, I found that it did something profound, is that it peeled away illusions of safety. I'm sure that the majority of people listening to this have some kind of concern about not being able to provide financially in like a worst case scenario. Like if it all fell apart and they had nothing and like they lost everything, it would be like death, right? But putting myself in situations like that time and time again, I found that it actually wasn't that bad, and that it puts us in contact more with how resourceful we can be rather than how resourced we are.
Mm.
And I find that to be one of the most significant pieces of going through rites of passage and initiation and all that is understanding literally like what I've got right here, like these digits, this body, this mind, this heart. Let's see what I can do.
Mm.
Let's see what I'm made of. And then everything that we manifest as a result of it, like that's just like the cherries on top. But having that knowing and that deep restedness in oneself to say that I'll sleep wherever I need to sleep and I'll figure it out is one of the wealthiest and richest experiences that we can have. And like there's a story about it as well in The Richest Man in Babylon. Like the deeper thread of going through that process and saying like, yeah, I'll sleep in a park, I'll fast if I need to, whatever it takes. Like that's essentially it's a form of a vision quest in itself. It's like stripping away at everything, being in the bare bones and not moving off the mark because my dreams are important to me and I'm gonna see this through.
Yeah, and part of me feels like, those and holding reverence to the initiation passages as well, that as a foundational understanding of how life actually works would have been so much more effective for me, let's say 18, to build my life upon that.
Hmm.
Because through the integration now, there's like having had experienced that and the evidence of what is possible without any resources, that ultimately I get to build upon that, and that's the worst case scenario, and that was actually amazing and fun, and there was so much life to be experienced in those moments. And if it all comes back to that, like I'm okay with it
Yeah.
instead of building a life on fear.
Yeah, totally. Building on fear is like building it on a foundation of sand. It can get swept away very, very easily. At least for me, I found like having the backbone to see through those challenging moments pull me in greater connection with truth, with reality. It just feels solid. Yeah, like, this feels good. This feels worthy and creates a sense of worth within me that's priceless.
That's beautiful that you bring that in as well. That you have a resonance and a sensitivity to understand what is foundational and what is empty, and integrating those decision making uh, parts into even business, where there's two actions that are available to take, and one's gonna feel really forced and empty and just creating a superficial shell, and the
Hmm.
other feels like, there's the substance, that let's go that direction. And I think following those threads has continued to really open a lot of doors and create impact both in myself and the other person who's in the exchange.
Yeah.
And it's like that's where the beauty is of all of this, is integrating those parts back into this say material world, that I don't have to follow these false ideas of grabbing onto ladders that are actually snakes.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. And I found the business is one of the perfect training grounds for it. Like you're playing in a set of rules which generally says that you just got to keep growing this thing, right? And so bring money in, grow it. But then when you bring in the piece of like having the intentionality around it, and making it a vehicle for one's own deep like soul evolution, not just developing one's mind or something like that, but like actually evolving your soul at the deepest level, then it holds you to a fine line. And what I mean by that is like the energy of money is exact, right? I can pay you exactly $1. I can't give you exactly a dollar, 1.59 hugs, right? I can pay you $1.59. And that exactness in money and the transactionality around it, for me, it has this experience, like the clarity of it, right? And it can be jarring, it can be triggering because sometimes we make decisions in business where we're like, and it felt really off. And like the bank account is the evidence of it. I had a perfect example where like I made a decision today where I made priority of growing the business over priority of the subtlety of how I was feeling. And it was just like a split second, right, in the conversation. And I felt the impact of it, and I was like, I'm never going to do that again because it pulled me out of the fine connection that I have with myself for the sake of growing business. It's not a way that I want to work at all. Like that's the beauty of business. Like it provides this playground to test oneself, to test one's integrity, to test one's fortitude. Yeah, a world that generally speaking is very snaky, sharky.
Mhm. Yeah. I suppose the greatest challenge is embodying this view so much that you're rippling that out to the other people in our networks. And because of previously a lot of the networks were just rippling the shell and the ladder and trying to influence us to make those decisions, and actually holding the groundedness of maybe a slightly slower, more gentle step forward, and knowing that that's more effective for what I'm needing in this moment. There was a second part here. Yeah, the transactional point. This was quite interesting. Something that came up in you sharing that. There was an NFT that I bought a couple of years ago, and I'd been sitting on it for a few months, and this was during lockdown, and I basically ran out of money for the first time of my life, and I was in a backpackers in Brisbane. I'd paid my 5 weeks accommodation up front just to give me the space, and we're getting down to maybe the last week or two, and I think I had $30 in my account. Uh, and at the time, I was eating like a handful of nuts for lunch and no dinner, and just holding this grace. I'm like, cool, we're gonna portion this out to make it work. And I hadn't really spoken to anyone at this point at the backpackers. It was three weeks in, say, and there was one night that I got to the $30, and I was like, all right, I'm either gonna try and portion again this handful of nuts for the next few days slash 2 weeks, or I can make a funny story about this and just let it go. So I went and spent the last $30 on Bundy rum and Turkish delight. And I was like, let's completely collapse any ideas about what I should be doing right now. That same night, one of the guys that was staying there, he was a delivery driver for Uber Eats, and he came up to me and said, "Hey, do you eat meat?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, I'm a vegetarian, and someone didn't pick up their order. Do you want this? It's got meat in it." I was like, "Okay." I opened it up. There's 4 meals in there. And I'm like, "Okay, you have no idea, you know." Anyway, the next part of that was I ended up getting chatting to him, and I offered him a haircut a few days later. Um, he went to pay me, and I was like, no, you have no idea, like the exchange and what was actually what that food meant to me at that time. Um, and so there was like a moment of exchange without like a fixed figure on it, right? I go back to my room, and I have an email on my phone from about 10 minutes prior. And the email was an offer on the NFT during the moment of transaction for $170,000.
Man. Oh, what a story.
It's like, yeah, how can I give any reasonable explanation to what happened there?
Yeah. Wow. That's insane. But I imagine that email changed things for you a little bit.
Well, interestingly, I said no. I declined the offer.
Right?
Um, I actually felt that it was interesting because I didn't in a time where I could actually still generate income, but
Mhm.
I didn't need this amount. And the irony of getting to that point and feeling still secure and safe in myself and my ability to create, the value on that money I didn't feel that. I was like, okay, I'm gonna continue. And probably the completion of that segment is that I ended up selling that same NFT when I got to America after Spain last year for $8,500. The value on it in that moment when I'd only had 100 and it was going to cover, you know, an experience to go traveling in a van across California. What was it worth to me at that moment?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, man. Looking at the values strictly through the lens of dollars and cents is one thing, but then appreciating the value of life experience is a completely different thing. I remember speaking to a guy who he was just working like a sales role, and he was like building himself up to be the sales manager of this place. And we were just talking, and I just come back from Mexico. I just started writing the book, and it seemed like I wasn't doing anything. Like I had the products, but they weren't really packaged up and set for sale. I was just like in a community stuff. Everything was still, it's like the seeds were planted, but everything was still beneath the earth. Like nothing was actually showing the value of what it was. And so I had that. I just started writing the book. I had maybe a few chapters in, and he was like, cast this comment of, like you're in your 30s and like you haven't really got much going for yourself. It was like that kind of comment. And I looked at him and I was like, look, yeah, looking at the lens through entrepreneurship, in that moment I had nothing. Look at the lens through life experience. I've lived more lives, known more beautiful, sacred places around the world than most people will probably ever know in a lifetime. And I got to live that at 33. And I got to live it in my youth. I got to live it in my strength. I got to live it in my clarity. I didn't wait till the end of life's journey to say, now I'm going to go give myself an opportunity to enjoy this world. Nah, like I'm enjoying this world every step of the way. And the cost and the investment for enjoying life every step of the way is that, yeah, like you don't have the routine of I'm gonna stay pinned in one location and just build a business. But what you do get is the freedom to get to know this earth in a way that most people never will. Get to know yourself in a way that most people will never know themselves, and uh, get to live some kick-ass stories. Because at the end of the days, like that's all we take with us, right? It's those treasured memories and moments. And I don't know too many people that say, "Man, I'm glad I did 60-hour work weeks for 50 hours a week for 30 years straight so that I can have a mortgage paid off." But I do know a handful of people who have the wildest stories that just chose to follow a very different path, right? And when I look at them and how they age, and like they seem content, there's a depth to their gaze that I see that I'm like, yeah, like this person's actually like, been through all of it. Yeah. They live the full range of human experience, and they can still smile about it and have a good time about it and laugh about it. And that's the real treasure to me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
The felt experience of life, and where do we get the opportunity to do that?
Moving forward, what ways are the listening taking you?
It's a big question, and I think someone asked me recently, do I see myself staying in Central Coast? And I said, for the next 12 months for sure. And they asked what's beyond that. I said, well, I'd be looking at what things I can do now, that's going to give me more opportunities in 12 months' time than what I'm currently aware of. And there are visions of the fruition of deepening opportunities for men's health, men's wellness. Uh, and the vision for that is actually a men's wellness center, called King's Room, which is
Mhm.
interesting because the name came and it was like king is, you know, the archetypal initiation after a man moves through his adulthood, his princehood, and coming into a more of a complete whole aspect of himself, and that felt really appropriate. And the second part of that is the message of supporting barbers to realize that role and what they play in accordance with supporting men to feel whole, and that those two paths walking hand in hand. And the vision is there, and I'm trusting that nature is organizing the events for them to be initiated as well.
Give us a closing comment, bro, for people that are listening that uh, going through the path of life through the lens of initiation. Give us a closing comment. What's the most valuable thing that you've encountered on the path that you'd love people to
Mm,
walk away?
okay. So for those listening, I'm just gonna invite you to take one slow breath in through your nose and closing your eyes on the exhale. And as you soften down into yourself and letting go of any ideas of where you need to be. And in this present moment, what is the one thing that feels the most scary to go out and do? Can you lean into that? Taking one last breath in and breathing life into your next steps. And gently opening your eyes. I trust it.
Nice transmission, bro. We'll cap it at that. Thank you, bro, for your time, for sharing your journey
Mm,
and the insights from the path. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.